The sound that broke my life wasn't a scream or a crash. It was a whisper, slick and venomous, slithering out of the plastic shell of my granddaughter's baby monitor. Like a serpent emerging from its den. We're just waiting for the inheritance. Mark. It can't be much longer. If you are watching this, please subscribe. And let me know where are you watching from. Like this story if you want to know what I did next. And comment after listening to my story what I did was right or not. Hi, my name is Eleanor. I am 70 years old, widow. The voice belonged to Chloe, my daughter-in-law. Though in that moment, it felt like it came from some stranger. Some creature wearing her skin. The words were so casual. So utterly devoid of the humanity I had believed she possessed. That for several heartbeats I stood paralyzed. Convinced I was having some sort of neurological episode. A stroke, perhaps. Or a cruel auditory hallucination. Born from the deep well of grief and loneliness, that had become my constant companion since Arthur's passing. My hand flew to my chest. Fingers pressing hard against my sternum. As if I could physically contain the sudden, violent pounding of my heart. The rhythm felt erratic, dangerous, like a bird trapped in a cage too small. I could feel the blood draining from my face. A cold sweat breaking out along my hairline. Despite the comfortable climate-controlled temperature of the kitchen, I stood frozen in what had always been my sanctuary. This beautiful, sun-drenched kitchen, with its professional-grade appliances I never used, and the Italian tile floor Arthur and I had chosen together. During our last trip to Florence, just moments before, I had been moving through my morning ritual with a sense of quiet contentment, measuring loose-leaf Earl Grey into the silver and Arthur gave me our 40th anniversary. Watching the morning sun paint warm golden stripes across the countertops. The world had felt solid, predictable in its gentle rhythms. We're just waiting for the inheritance. My hand, which had been holding the delicate bone china teacup, part of a set we'd bought on our honeymoon in London. Each piece representing a precious memory, went suddenly, completely slack. Shards of white porcelain skittered across the floor. The tiny hand-painted red roses that decorated the rim, now scattered like drops of blood across the earthy tiles. The dark pool of tea began to seep between the grout lines, spreading in an ugly stain. It was more than broken china. It was the sound of my trust, my family, my very reality, being irrevocably destroyed. A perfect, painful metaphor for what was happening to me. I didn't move to clean it up. I couldn't have if I'd tried. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected from my brain's commands. I just stood there, my 72-year-old body trembling as if I were standing naked in a blizzard, watching the evidence of my shattered innocence spread across the floor. The baby monitor, that small, innocuous gray device meant to connect me to the gurgling joy of my 6-month-old granddaughter, Lily, had instead become a conduit to my own obsolescence. It had become a window into a truth so ugly, I could scarcely comprehend it. Mark, my son, my only child, chuckled, a low, complicit sound that traveled through the monitor and struck me with physical force, knocking the air from my lungs. I could picture him perfectly stretched out on their expensive leather sofa, one arm thrown behind his head. That familiar, easy smile playing on his lips. "Keep your voice down, babe," he said, his tone light, unconcerned. "The monitor's on in the kitchen." "Oops," Chloe said, not sounding sorry at all. "Well, it's true. This whole playing happy family thing is exhausting." The constant smiling, pretending to care about her stories, acting interested in her bridge club gossip. We have our own lives to start. Once the house and whatever's left are ours, we can finally breathe. I know. Mark's voice was placating, weary, as if discussing a mildly inconvenient business obligation. "Just be patient. She's not going to live forever." The doctor said her blood pressure was up at her last checkup. The casual cruelty of that last statement stole what little breath I had left. He wasn't just waiting. He was monitoring, calculating, perhaps even hoping. The conversation moved on seamlessly, as if they hadn't just dismantled my entire world. To what they were ordering for dinner, to whether they should try the new Thai place or stick with their usual Indian restaurant, to a movie they wanted to stream later. I stumbled away from the kitchen, my vision blurring, through the grand living room with its 20-foot vaulted ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the perfectly manicured landscaping, the very landscaping I'd paid $25,000 to have installed when I moved in, wanting to contribute, to make their beautiful home even more beautiful. I made it to the sunroom, Arthur's favorite room, the place where we had spent countless happy hours together, and collapsed into his worn wicker armchair. The cushion still held the faint, ghostly impression of his form. And for a terrifying moment, the sense of his absence was so acute I could barely draw breath. Now I wrapped my arms around myself, a pathetic attempt at but the chill was deep inside my bones, beyond the reach of any physical warmth. The Florida sun streamed through the windows, but I felt locked in perpetual winter, waiting for the inheritance. The words echoed in the quiet room, each repetition another twist of the knife, all of it the tearful, heartfelt insistence that I move in with them in their sprawling Tampa home. Just 3 months after Arthur's death, the sweet pleas about not wanting me to be alone in that big, empty house, the way Chloe would link her arm in mine and say with such convincing warmth, "We're your family, Eleanor. We'll take care of you. You'll never have to be lonely again." It was all a performance. A carefully staged, brilliantly acted play, where my role was the wealthy, ailing widow, and their role was the dutiful, loving heirs. Counting down the days, maybe even the hours, until the curtain fell for the final time. I saw myself rocking Lily to sleep just last week, humming the same lullaby I'd sung to Mark, feeling the solid, trusting weight of her in my arms, breathing in that sweet, pure baby scent that clung to her pajamas. I'd done it so they could have date nights, so Chloe could get to her hot yoga classes, so Mark could work late without the stress of a crying infant. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom," he'd said, kissing my cheek before they left for a fancy steakhouse. The memory, once so precious, now felt like a brand seared into my soul. I remembered sitting at this very table, writing check after check from the account Arthur had so carefully built. $15,000 for the new saltwater swimming pool, $8,000 for the custom, imported Italian nursery furniture, $5,000 here and $3,000 there when Mark mentioned cash flow issues at his architecture firm. "It's a group effort, Mom," he'd said, smiling that easy, open smile that was so like his father's. "We're all in this together." I had felt so needed, so useful, so seamlessly woven into the fabric of my son's new family. The stark, brutal truth washed over me, cold and suffocating. I wasn't building anything. I was the foundation they were building on. And they were impatient for me to crumble so they could erect their own monument. I was sitting in the green room of my own life, waiting for my final exit, while the stars of the show were backstage, impatiently checking their watches and complaining about how long the production was taking. A dry, heaving sob escaped my lips. A raw, torn sound I barely recognized as my own. I didn't cry tears. I was too hollowed out, too desiccated for that. The grief was a physical weight, a leaden core in my chest, where my heart used to be. So heavy I felt it might pull me straight through the floor. They weren't just waiting for my money, for the house, for the investments Arthur had spent a lifetime accumulating. They were waiting for me to die. This was my life. The life I had built with Arthur. The life that contained decades of love and struggle and joy and memory. And I wasn't ready to leave it. Not on their terms. I stood up, my joints protesting the long stillness, the wicker chair creaking in relief. The trembling had stopped. In its place was a strange, vibrating stillness. It all looked different now. Like a beautiful stage set, the lush beauty was a facade. The apparent happiness an elaborate illusion crafted for my benefit, to keep me compliant in spending. But as I stood there, watching a hummingbird dart between the hibiscus flowers, a crucial realization settled in my bones. Cold and hard as granite, I hadn't handed them everything, not yet. I spent the night in Arthur's chair, not sleeping, not even truly thinking, but simply existing as a vessel for the shock that had been poured into me. The night descended with its tropical swiftness, the vibrant sunset bleeding into deep indigo, and then a velvety, stardusted black. As darkness fell, the automatic pool lights clicked on with a soft, definitive thump, their submerged beams casting, shimmering, distorted reflections that danced across the sunroom's vaulted ceiling like aquatic ghosts. Each memory, once a treasured snapshot of my new beginning, now unspooled as evidence in a trial I never knew was being conducted. The feature presentation began with the day they'd approached me. Just 3 months after we'd laid Arthur to rest. I was still wearing his robe, still setting a place for him at the table out of habit. They arrived with concerned faces that I now recognized as masterfully crafted masks. Mark sat beside me on the sofa, his hand warm and heavy on my shoulder, his voice laced with a convincing blend of love and worry. "Mom," he'd said, his eyes Arthur's eyes so full of earnest care. "This house, it's too big for you, and it's full of him. Every room, every corner. It's not healthy. You're drowning in memories here." He'd squeezed my shoulder. "Come live with us, in Tampa. Be a part of Lily's life from the very beginning. She needs her grandma. We need you." Then Chloe, perched on the armrest, had leaned in, her voice dripping with the synthetic honey I had mistaken for genuine warmth. "We have the casita, Eleanor. It's just sitting there over the garage. It's a full apartment to kitchenette. A lovely little bathroom. A private entrance. You'll have your own space. Your own independence. But you'll be right here with us. We can have family dinners every night. It will be so good for all of us. You shouldn't be alone right now." I had been so raw, so utterly adrift. Their offer had felt like a life raft thrown to me in a stormy, endless sea. I clutched at it with the desperation of the drowning. I'd sold my own lovely, smaller home in Sarasota. The cozy bungalow Arthur and I had downsized to a decade ago. Now, sitting in the dark, I saw it all for what it was. Not a loving invitation, but a cold, strategic consolidation. The memories kept coming, each one a fresh cut. I saw myself handing Mark a check for $15,000 for the new swimming pool. "It's for Lily," he'd said, beaming. "She learned to swim in her own backyard." I saw myself writing another for $8 for the stunning custom-built crib and changing table from Italy that now sat in the nursery. "Only the best for our girl," Chloe had purred, kissing my cheek. I thought of the countless hours I'd spent babysitting Lily, the precious, stolen moments I'd believed were building a bond between us. Now, I wondered if they were just free childcare, another way to extract value from me while they waited. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky a bruised, purplish gray, a new feeling began to pierce the numb agony that had encased me. It was a small, cold, hard spark, deep in my core. A glimmer of flint struck in the darkness. Anger? It wasn't the hot, flailing, tear-streaked rage of my youth. This was something else entirely. A glacial, slow-moving, and determined fury. It was the ice that comes after the fire. Solid and unyielding. They thought I was a ghost already, a faint, fading presence waiting to dissipate. They had mistaken the quiet dignity of my grief for weakness. The open-handed generosity of my kindness for stupidity. We're just waiting for the inheritance. The sentence echoed once more in the quiet room. But its power had transformed. It was no longer a knife twisting in my heart. It was a gauntlet thrown at my feet. A challenge. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the stirrings of an old, familiar strength. The same strength that had carried me through Arthur's illness, through the grief of losing my parents, through all of life's inevitable hardships. I stood up, my stiff joints popping and protesting the long, motionless vigil. I was cold to the bone and every muscle ached, but my mind was clearer, sharper than it had been in over a year. I walked to the kitchen, my footsteps firm and deliberate on the cool tile. I stepped carefully over the shattered pieces of my teacup, the white porcelain and painted roses gleaming in the half-light. I didn't sweep them up. I left them there. A final, symbolic act of leaving that trusting, naive version of myself behind. Among the broken pieces. Let them clean it up. I had more important work to do. In the privacy of my cassette, I went directly to my large hardshell suitcase. Stored in the back of the closet, buried beneath winter sweaters I never needed in Florida, was my break glass in case of emergency fund. It was something Arthur and I had started as a macabre joke, after a particularly bad hurricane season. But over the years it had evolved. It became our secret screw-it-all fund, a tangible representation of our independence. There was just over $6,000 in cash, hidden in a compartment I'd carved out of a thick, hardback copy of Gone with the Wind. Arthur's idea of a joke. If you ever need to escape a lost cause, Scarlett, he'd say with a wink, you've got the means right there. My fingers trembled only slightly as I retrieved the crisp bills, and, tucked beside them, the slightly faded business card I hadn't looked at in years. Benjamin Ben Carter-esque. Carter and Associates. Arthur's lawyer. His oldest friend. The best man at our wedding. At the funeral. Amidst a sea of handshakes and hollow condolences, Ben had found me. He'd held my hands in his own eyes red-rimmed and clouded with a grief that mirrored my own. But his gaze was sharp, intent. Eleanor, he'd said, his voice a low, serious rumble that cut through the polite murmur around us. Listen to me. Arthur was my brother in everything but blood. That makes you my family. If those kids of yours ever give you a moment's trouble, and I mean any trouble, you call me. You understand. Day or night. I'm not just a lawyer. I'm your friend. I had brushed it off then, touched by his loyalty, but utterly confident in his mistaken assumption. My kids would never be trouble. My son was my pride, my joy. How foolish I had been. Now, the card felt like a lifeline, solid and real in my hand. I took a long hot shower, washing the stagnant night away, scrubbing my skin until it felt new. I dressed with deliberate care, in a simple cream-colored linen shift, the kind Arthur always said made me look elegant and formidable. I stood before the mirror and applied a little lipstick, a bold, red slash of color that felt like a war paint. A small but significant act of defiance. The pale, grief-stricken widow was gone. I was not a ghost. I was Eleanor Grace Sullivan. And I was still very much alive. When I walked into the main house for breakfast, the scene was a perfect tableau of domestic normalcy. That now felt like a sick parody. Lily was in her height, happily smearing peach yogurt on her face and the tray. Mark was scrolling through financial news on his phone, a half-eaten piece of toast on his plate. Chloe was sipping a vivid green smoothie, dressed in expensive-looking athleisure wear. Good morning, Mom, Mark said. The words cheerful and automatic. He didn't look up from his screen. Chloe gave me a tight, perfunctory smile that didn't reach her eyes. We heard a crash last night from your place. Everything okay? Her tone was light, but her gaze was sharp, probing. I really looked at them, seeing them for the first time without the filter of a mother's love, or a widow's desperation. I saw the impatience in the rapid, irritated tap of Mark's index finger on his phone screen. Everything is fine, I said, my voice remarkably steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. I walked to the coffee maker, my movements calm and deliberate. I just remembered I have a A doctor's appointment this morning. A last-minute follow-up. The lie slipped out smoothly. A practiced phrase I'd used a dozen times before for actual appointments. Chloe's interest was immediate and predatory. She straightened up. Her smoothie forgotten. Oh, what for? Is something wrong? There was a faint, eager gleam in her eye. The same look she got when a package was delivered. I turned and met her gaze squarely. Holding it for a beat too long. Just routine, I said. My tone dismissive, yet pleasant, as I poured the rich, dark coffee into my mug. Don't worry yourselves about it. The shift was subtle, but I felt it in the room. A slight stiffening in Mark's shoulders. A barely perceptible tightening around Chloe's mouth. The lie was my shield. My first move in a game I hadn't known I was playing. For the first time, I was no longer a pawn on their board. I had picked myself up, and I was moving, with silent, determined purpose, toward becoming a player. The law offices of Carter and Associates were housed in a dignified 3-story brick building, nestled between a historic bookstore and a cafe with striped awnings. In the heart of downtown St. Petersburg, it was a world away from the sterile, modern glamour of my son's neighborhood. With its aggressively manicured lawns, and houses that looked like architectural renderings come to life. This part of the city had soul. The bricks were weathered to a soft rose gold, and ivy clung to the walls in a way that suggested careful tending over decades. Not a landscaper's quick installation. Pushing through the heavy, brass-handled door was like stepping into another century. The air inside was cool and still, carrying the clean, sharp scent of lemon polish, and the profound, dusty fragrance of old, important paper, the smell of settled history and weighty decisions. A slow-turning ceiling fan whispered overhead, its rhythmic thump-thump a soothing counterpoint to the frantic beat of my own heart. The floor was dark, wide plank oak, worn smooth and slightly concave in the pathways of greatest traffic. A testament to the countless clients who had walked this same path, bearing their own burdens of grief, conflict, and hope. Ben's secretary, a woman about my age named Agnes, with a kind, intelligent face and a cloud of soft white hair, looked up from her typewriter. An actual, mechanical typewriter, I noted with a pang of affection. Her eyes, behind stylish tortoiseshell glasses, widened in recognition, then immediately softened with concern. "Eleanor Sullivan," she said, her voice warm with a genuine feeling that felt like a balm on my raw nerves. She stood, smoothing her sensible tweed skirt. "Oh, honey, it's so good to see you. But I wish it were under better circumstances." She came around the massive oak desk without hesitation, and enveloped me in a brief, firm hug. It wasn't the perfunctory air-kiss greeting of Chloe's world. It was a real embrace, solid and comforting. It was the first uncalculated, human touch I'd felt in a year, and the simple kindness of it nearly shattered the composure I had so carefully built on the drive over. I felt my eyes burn, but I stubbornly held the tears back. She drew away, holding me at arm's length, her hands on my shoulders. "Ben's on a call, but it's wrapping up. Go on in. He'll want to see you right away." She ushered me directly into the inner sanctum. Ben's office was exactly as I remembered it. A room that seemed to have been preserved in amber since Arthur's time. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves groaned with leather-bound legal volumes. A massive, partner-style desk. Its surface a landscape of tidy stacks of paper and a green-shaded banker's lamp dominated the space. Behind it, a large window offered a view of a quiet brick-paved courtyard, with a bubbling fountain. Ben was on the phone, his back to me, speaking in the low, measured tones of a man used to being listened to. "We'll file the motion this afternoon." "No, they have no standing. It's a frivolous claim." He hung up the heavy receiver the moment he swiveled in his chair and saw me, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. He was older, of course, The last time I'd seen him was at Arthur's funeral, and grief had blurred the details. Now, I saw the years clearly. His hair was fully white, a thick, brilliant shock of it, and the lines around his eyes and mouth had deepened. But his handshake was just as firm, his spine just as straight, and his gaze, a piercing, perceptive blue, was just as sharp as it had been 40 years ago. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble, like distant thunder. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply looked at my face, and I saw his brilliant legal mind working, reading the story of betrayal and heartbreak, written in the new lines of strain around my eyes, in the tight set of my mouth. "Sit down," he commanded gently, gesturing to the worn, buttery soft leather client chairs. "Tell me," and so I did. I told him everything, the words pouring out in a torrent I could no longer contain. I started with the move, describing how Mark and Chloe had preyed on my vulnerability, their concern a carefully crafted weapon. I listed the money I'd given them, the pool, the nursery, the loans, the numbers sounding even more staggering spoken aloud in this quiet, serious room. I described the subtle ways they'd isolated me, how my world had shrunk to the dimensions of their property, how my friends from Sarasota had slowly stopped calling because the drive was too far, and my availability was always tied to Lily's schedule. And then, my voice growing thin and reedy, I told him about the baby monitor. I described the ordinary beauty of that morning. The sunlight, the tea, the crushing normalcy of it all before the whisper came. As I repeated the words, "We're just waiting for the inheritance," my voice shook, betraying the earthquake that single sentence had triggered in my soul. But I did not cry. I would not give them my tears. Ben didn't interrupt. He listened with the intense focus of a surgeon assessing a wound, his hands steepled under his chin, his expression growing grimmer and more granite-like with every sentence. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of my story. When I finally finished, the last word hanging in the air between us, he let out a long, slow breath, as if he'd been holding it the entire time. "Financial exploitation," he said. The term clinical, solid, giving a name to the formless monster that had been haunting me. An intentional infliction of emotional distress. "Eleanor, we have a very strong case for undue influence. They systematically created a situation of dependency and isolation, specifically to gain access to and control over your assets. What you've described is a textbook case." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his gaze locking with mine. "We can sue them. We can go for damages. For the return of every cent you gave them under false pretenses. It would be a messy, public, drawn-out fight. But we would win." I shook my head, the movement sharp and decisive. "I don't want a long drawn-out court case, Ben," I said, my voice finding its steel again. "I don't want their money. I don't want to see them in a courtroom. I just want out. I want a clean break. I want to make sure they never, ever get a single cent of what Arthur and I spent a lifetime building together." A grim, satisfied smile touched his lips. A flash of the old fighter I knew was in him. "That," he said, "I can help you with. It's a lot cleaner, faster, and in my opinion, far more satisfying. We don't need to sue them. We just need to make sure there's nothing for them to sue for." He pulled a fresh, yellow legal pad from his drawer. He unscrewed a fountain pen. "First," he began, his tone all business now, "we freeze everything. We'll file a new durable power of attorney and healthcare surrogate documents today, naming me as your agent. We revoke all previous documents that named Mark. Then, we change your will. Today, we make it so ironclad, so bulletproof, that the most expensive lawyer in New York couldn't find a chink in it." For the next 2 hours, we systematically dismantled the future Mark and Chloe had so confidently and casually planned for. Over Thai food and movie selections, It was a surgical, methodical dismemberment of their greed. Line by line, clause by clause, we erased their names from the narrative of my legacy. The main house in Tampa. My diverse investment accounts that Arthur had so wisely nurtured. The life insurance policies. The remaining six-figure proceeds from my Sarasota home sale. All of it was redirected, cut off from them as cleanly as a surgeon severing a diseased limb. Ben looked up from his notepad, his pen poised. Who do you want it to go to, Eleanor? This is your decision. Your legacy. I had thought about this during my sleepless night in Arthur's chair. In the gray hours of the dawn, the answer came to me not as a whim, but as a deep, settled conviction. I want to set up a trust, I said, my voice clear and firm. The Arthur and Eleanor Sullivan Foundation. It will provide scholarships for late-in-life students. For people who are starting over after a tragedy or a loss, people like I am now, and I want a significant portion to go to the local elder abuse shelter and advocacy network. They need the resources more than my son needs a new sports car. Ben's eyes gleamed with unmistakable approval. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. A legacy, he said softly. Instead of an inheritance. Using your resources to create ripples of good, rather than funding a lifetime of entitlement. Arthur would have loved that. He would have been so proud of you, Eleanor. Then came the final, most painful part. Lily, my sweet, innocent granddaughter, whose gurgles had been the backdrop to my betrayal. I want to leave a separate, smaller trust for Lily, I said, the words catching in my throat. But it's accessible only when she turns 25. It can only be used for education. Real education, not a for-profit diploma mill, or to start a legitimate business. It's to be administered by a third-party trustee you recommend. Her parents cannot be trustees. They cannot access it. They cannot borrow against it. It is entirely out of their reach. It was my act of faith. A message in a bottle tossed to the woman Lily might one day become. A hope that she would escape the toxic values of her parents. Ben nodded. Making a note, wise, will make it contingent on her attaining a certain age. To ensure some maturity. It's a lifeboat for her, Eleanor. A very generous one. When the documents were drafted and printed, their language dense and impenetrable with harasses and heretofore, Ben called in a notary. A serious young woman who went about her work with quiet efficiency. As I signed my name, Eleanor Grace Sullivan, over and over, on line after line, I felt a strange and powerful sensation. It wasn't joy or vengeance. It was a profound, solemn sense of reclamation. When the last document was signed, witnessed, and notarized, a deep silence fell in the office. The deed was done. The fortress around my legacy was built. Its gates closed and barred to Mark and Chloe forever. Now what? I asked, the pen finally still in my hand, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Now, Ben said, gathering the documents into a neat pile. You go and live your life. You travel. You read. You sit on a beach and do absolutely nothing. I will handle the notification. I will send them a formal, registered letter, informing them of the changes to the estate plan. I nodded. A wave of relief washing over me. I had no desire to witness the explosion, to hear the screams of frustration, the specious claims of love, the gaslighting and manipulation. I left Ben's office feeling physically lighter. The Florida sun outside was bright and mercilessly warm on my face. But it felt cleansing now. I got into my car. The one thing that was still solely, unquestionably in my name. And I drove. I didn't go back to the casita. I didn't even glance in the direction of Tampa. I pointed the car west, toward the Gulf, and drove to a small, quiet, pink-painted hotel on Clearwater Beach. One where Arthur and I had spent a magical weekend for our 30th anniversary. I checked in under my own name. The simple act feeling like a declaration of independence. I went to my room, A simple, airy space with French doors leading to a small, private balcony. I walked out and sat in the white wicker chair, looking out at the endless, rolling expanse of the Gulf of Mexico. The water was a brilliant, impossible turquoise. The horizon a clean, straight, unwavering line between sea and sky. The call came 2 days later, shattering the profound, sun-drenched silence of my hotel sanctuary. My phone, which had been so blessedly silent, lit up like a Christmas tree seized by a seizure. Mark? The name flashed with a frantic, rhythmic pulse. Then it stopped, only to start again a minute later. Over and over, a relentless, digital drumbeat of panic. Then Chloe's name appeared, followed by a flurry of text messages that materialized on the screen like poison darts. Mom, where are you? A lawyer called us. What is this? Eleanor, this is Chloe. You need to call us right now. This isn't funny. Mom, call me now. What have you done? I watched the screen from my balcony chair, a cup of coffee cooling in my hand. I read each message, each one a little more unhinged than the last. And I waited for the familiar pang of maternal anxiety, the desperate urge to soothe and fix. But it never came. With a sense of finality that felt both terrifying and liberating, I held down the power button and watched the screen go black. The silence returned. Deeper than before, I had already gotten a new phone. With a new number, a lifeline extended only to Ben and his secretary, Agnes. It was my first true act of severance. A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at the hotel front desk by special courier. The hotel manager brought it to me personally with a respectful nod. It was from Ben. Inside was a copy of the formal, brutally concise letter he had sent to Mark and Chloe, notifying them of the irrevocable changes to my estate plan. The language was dry, legal, and utterly devoid of mercy. Paper-clipped to it was a sticky note in Ben's distinctive, looping handwriting. Their reaction was, as predicted, volcanic. Screaming, threats, the works. They have consulted a lawyer who has already informed them they have no legal standing. You are safe. Paper-clipped to that was a single, folded sheet of paper. It was a printout of an email. From Mark Sullivan. To Benjamin Carter. Mr. Carter, I don't know what lies my mother has told you, but she is a confused and grieving old woman. She is not of sound mind. We will be contesting this. You have torn our family apart for no reason. We were caring for her. All we ever wanted was what was best for her. At least tell her to give us back Lily's trust. That's our daughter's money. She has no right. I read it twice. The words not sparking anger, but a deep, weary sadness. It was the final, irrefutable confirmation I needed. The baby monitor had not been an anomaly. They were still just waiting. The object of their wait had simply shifted from my death to a legal loophole that would never appear. I felt a sharp, physical pang for Lily, seeing her growing up in that environment of such calculated avarice, but I had protected her future as best I could from across a great chasm. I had to trust that the seed of decency and independence I'd planted with that trust would one day find sunlight, even in the shadow of her parents' values. It was time. Time to stop hiding in a hotel room and start building my new life. Brick by deliberate brick. With Ben's help, who seemed to have a knack for this sort of quiet rescue, I found a small, vibrant, independent living community in a forgotten gem of a town called Cedar Key. On Florida's wilder, quieter nature coast, it was a place of peeling paint and profound character, of rocking chairs on wide shaded porches, of shrimp boats named Miss Bonnie and the stubborn mule chugging out of the harbor at dawn. Their diesel engines, a gentle alarm clock. It was a town of artists, retired professors, and weathered fishermen. I used a portion of my break glass fund to buy a little clapboard cottage, unapologetically mine. The silence here was different. It wasn't the oppressive, judgmental silence of the casino. where I was hyper-aware of being a burden, of occupying space that was only temporarily mine. This was a peaceful, gentle, quiet, a canvas upon which the beautiful sounds of life were painted. The cry of seagulls wheeling overhead, the laughter of neighbors chatting over fences, the rustle of palm fronds in the salty breeze, the distant clang of a buoy in the channel. I started to live again, not just exist. I tentatively joined a weekly watercolor class held in the community center, and discovered I had a truly terrible but wonderfully enthusiastic hand for painting lopsided pelicans and seascapes, where the water often looked more like spinach soup, but I loved it. I made friends, real friends, not the performative, country club acquaintances of my old life. There was Lou, a retired fisherman with a face like a roadmap of the Gulf of Mexico, and hands as rough as grouper skin, who taught me how to deftly crack a stone crab claw and get every morsel of the sweet meat. There was Irene, a sharp-witted widow from New York, who had escaped a different kind of gilded cage, and who always, without fail, saved me a seat at the riotous Friday night bingo game, her eyes twinkling with mischief. One evening, sitting on my porch with Irene, a glass of sweet tea in hand, watching the sunset ignite the sky in a breathtaking blaze of orange, violet, and rose, I realized with a jolt of surprise that I was happy. Not just content, or safe, or resigned, but truly, deeply, profoundly happy. Months bled into a year. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, I received a final email from Ben, forwarded to my new, fiercely guarded private address. The subject line of the original email made my breath catch in my throat. "I'm sorry, Mom." I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the delete key. The temptation to simply erase it, to let the past stay buried, was powerful. But curiosity, that last, frayed, stubborn thread connecting me to the ghost of my old life, made me open it. "Mom, I don't know if you'll even read this. I don't deserve for you to. Chloe left me. She said I was a failure, that I couldn't even secure my own mother's money. She took Lily and moved back to her parents in Atlanta. I've lost everything. The house is too big for just me. The payments, I can't keep up. I get it now, or I'm starting to. I see what I did. What we did, it was wrong. It was monstrous. I was weak, and I let her poison me against you. I let her convince me that we were entitled to the life you and Dad built. You were always so strong after Dad died. You just carried on. And I think I resented you for it. I think I wanted you to fall apart so I could be the strong one. I'm so sorry. I'm not asking for the money back. I know I don't deserve it. I'm just asking for, I don't know, forgiveness. A chance to talk. You're my mom. You're all I have left. Love. Mark." I read it once, slowly. Then I closed the laptop with a soft, definitive click. I felt a profound and bottomless sadness, but not for the man he had become. The sadness was for the boy he had been. I thought about replying. I crafted a dozen responses in my head. Angry ones, sorrowful ones, coldly dismissive ones. I thought about the endless, draining cycle of drama and manipulation that would inevitably follow. I would not sacrifice my peace on the altar of his belated, and likely temporary, remorse. I picked up my pen, the same one I used for my watercolors. I opened a fresh, blank journal. I did not write to him. I wrote for myself. I wrote, the words flowing smoothly and surely. Some ships are meant to sink. Some bridges are meant to burn. Some things in this life are broken beyond any repair, not by the severity of the break, but by the poison that coated the shards. Some betrayals are so deep, so fundamental, that the only way to heal is to build something new, far from the toxic wreckage. Forgiveness is not a transaction. It is not a door I must open to let the storm back in. True forgiveness is a gift I give to myself. The gift of releasing the anger so it no longer burns a hole in my own soul. And that gift does not require me to let the toxic back into my carefully tended garden. My peace is not up for negotiation. My peace is my final, unanswerable word. Then I closed the journal. I stood up and walked back to my small easel on the porch. I picked up my brush. I mixed a color. I was not in a hotel. I was not in a casino. I was not in a house full of ghosts and lies. I was home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in comments. Your voice matters.